anything about it either right now. And there's millions of people who are actually undergoing that. And I know it's happened in places like Asia, Vietnam is one example of people actually being taken off the streets and actually being forced into modern day slavery. And the thing is, we don't address that because it doesn't impact on our lives right now. Just like for a majority of people, it didn't impact on their lives back then. They just went about it. If you know what I mean.
Yes.
All right, because it's something that's happening right now. Because even while we're probably having this conversation, there is likely that a woman is actually being raped as we speak, against her will.
Of course, and absolutely unacceptable and gross. But the historical perspective of slavery is interesting. That's the point I'm getting at. Every single society has used it, or almost every single one that I can think of. Roman, Greek, Egyptian, British, American. There's all been that concept of slavery for empire building. Otherwise, for instance, the pyramids wouldn't have been built. No, so absolutely. Here we are, the greatest tourist attraction in Egypt, and people talking about the technological brilliance of them, built by slaves. Nobody's saying knock them down because they're built by slaves. But mainly because the slaves aren't alive at the moment, or their descendants aren't either.
But people seem to forget something, particularly in America, that it was the Republicans who actually wanted to put an end to slavery in that period of time, and it's almost as though now they're the one who are actually being branded the racists in some cases. And it's not. It was the Democratic Party who actually stopped the Ku Klux Klan. It was the Democratic Party who introduced the Jim Crow laws. It was the Democratic Party who wanted slavery to continue. And the thing is, they're still following suit by actually wanting to have open borders so they can actually get cheap labor through as well. It's the Republicans in some ways that they haven't really changed their philosophy in terms of, they want people to actually have the same opportunity to be able to, freely to actually make their decisions and actually go and grow. So when you actually look at how the Democrats are actually, they haven't changed their point of view from then. All they've done is shift their message. But and it's like when you give people welfare, and this is why I'm not a left wing. I don't have left-wing beliefs. As soon as you actually start giving people welfare and things like that, you make them dependent on you, as opposed to you being able to thrive on your own. Now, I know you've talked about in the past that people need to be led and things like this. There's a limited level of leadership that limited government intervention, but nothing should stop anyone from being able to live their own lives. And by making people dependent on welfare and things like that, you make them dependent on you, which is large state behavior, which is what the European Union was looking to actually introduce. And in some ways, I'm quite glad that the UK is out of the European Union.
Yes, but of course, this issue of dependency that you raised brings us into sharp focus right now with furlough, because essentially millions of people have had the longest summer holiday they've had in modern or even ancient times, really. And people just don't understand the consequences of what's going to happen. And in fact, one of my patients who made a couple of investments, he was wondering how long he should keep his stocks. But the fact is, yes, there's been a bounce in the stock market, but if you have a look at some of the previous enormous recessions, you always get a bounce. In fact, a rather big bounce, and then you get a bigger drop again, usually because you then have the real economic consequences of the original problem. And in this case, when everyone comes out of furlough and the non-viable firms simply either make people redundant or simply just shut shop and drop people without anything because they don't have the resources to give them anything, you're going to have millions of people on the street. And the and it's still going to be fairly warm, i.e., things are going to be running out in September or October. And the reason I say that is because the riots concerning Mark Duggan happened in a nice warm summer. And people are only human. I remember when I was in Bahrain, and they started the riots there a few years ago. When it got dark and people got hungry, literally things went completely back to normal, absolutely peaceful and normal, with just a few abandoned army vehicles. And then come the morning again, the more energetic people got up and started the trouble. Evening again, people going to the restaurants quite happy, and then eventually got a lot worse. Now, the point is that if you're now going to have millions of people unemployed, homeless potentially, angry, because it will increasingly be evident that lockdown was completely unnecessary, at least in its current form, and that it was grossly mismanaged, and even by experts who decided to break their own lockdown. That's how fervently they believed in it. There's going to be real trouble, and that's when everything is going to come under serious stress.
Look, I mean, we're looking to. People are talking about a economic, not even a recession, but a depression. Worse than we actually had in the 1920s. And if I had to have an opinion on that, I'd probably believe it to be right. And the thing is, I think people need to actually wise up and realize the government can't bail you out forever, and they can't. And you've got to take you've got to take control into your own hands, and actually find a solution without the government support, as if the government actually wasn't there, because they can't focus on individual people.
Well, not only that, but the government have showed themselves. The government have showed themselves to be not fit for purpose.
Well, but the thing is, any government in the UK probably wouldn't be fit for purpose in that case.
Correct. Correct.
And I think, and this is going on in many other countries around the world as well. So
Correct.
it's not just UK. But the thing is, people have got to take it into their own hands and realize, actually, take some accountability and hold themselves accountable, and says, this is the situation. It's outside our control. It's been presented to us, but how do I take control of the situation for myself, my family, my friends, and if you want to, and humanity around you? But you've got to be able to look after, get yourself out of the mess first before you can actually go and help other people. It's the old saying about when you go on a plane, when they tell you if the plane's going to crash, you put your mask on your face first, and then you then put the mask onto your child's face and things like that. Because if you can't actually get yourself sorted first, you can't then look after your child, or you can't look after other people. So you've got to get yourself sorted out first. Yeah. And you've got to take responsibility. Now, just quickly, there's some people, particularly because I see the over 50s being the most vulnerable market at the moment, because a lot of them will lose their jobs. A lot of them will still have about 20 years to go before they can even consider retirement. For some of them, their only option or their best option may be to actually go and start their own business. Now, whatever business that is in this situation, it's something they will probably actually need to consider, because the government's not going to bail you out forever.
Andy, you can't say that. People can't start their own businesses because most of them are either not capable or they don't want to. Because starting your own business means that you're a leader, and very few people are leaders. We're
talking about options. Look. Admittedly, there's a level of aptitude and tenacity and grit you've got to be able to actually have to do that. But the thing is, that also comes from, if you're in a desperate situation, sometimes you actually have no alternative but to raise up and be a leader. Particularly when you've got a family at stake. I mean, every father, whether they're a natural leader or not, is a leader of their household in terms of bringing up their children. And they have to take a leadership role. So at some point, some people are going to actually have to step up. And not,
yeah, but that's just family, isn't it? And that's just microstructure, and the fractal nature of society, and what fractals are little patterns that repeat on ever increasing dimensions. So you have, of course, you have a unit, a couple, and one member of that couple is the leader, and then you have the family. Member of the family is a leader. Then you have the community. One member of the community is a leader, and then you have the country. One member of the country is the leader. But it doesn't mean that a dad is going to be a natural potential leader of a community or a country. Not possible.
Look, there's plenty of things you can actually go and do. As I said, for some people it may be the only option, and I am probably, as I say it, my thoughts are probably going to people who actually have quite an advanced skill set, who've got managerial. A managerial skill set, as I said, particularly in the over 50s, and I say the over 50s market because a lot of them in the over 50s market, particularly in London, I suppose, will actually have a level of experience on actually managing others. Now,
so if you're talking about educated professionals,
yes, admittedly, I mean the thing is. But then again, I sort of say that because the circle of people that I know are probably in that spectrum. I don't live in the north of England where there are far more factories and things like this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you see, the thing is the current politics, where it's power to the people, well, really power to the media, really, isn't it? Who then lead the people, has been shown to be not fit for purpose. We've had 3 years of nonsense with Brexit, complete nonsense, actually. And the country still functioned because of the civil service. The government weren't doing anything. And now you've got coronavirus, where the government haven't been leading at all. They've been hiding behind experts. Now, as I said, you go and see a solicitor. You don't have to do what the solicitor says. You consider what the solicitor says. You maybe even go to another solicitor, and then you decide for yourself. But for members of the government to be saying, we're going by the experts, I'm sorry, no, because there are other experts who are saying completely the opposite thing. And you as the government have to decide for yourselves and take responsibility. Not say, oh, I'm sorry, we messed up, but we only went by the experts.
But and we've had this conversation before, Theo. How do you determine which one's the right expert? Is it the right expert in your eyes, or is it the right expert in their eyes? I don't know. I don't think.
Well, it's not difficult. The government are using their pet experts for a start. So the ones they're using are people using, who are connected to the government, who are using government grants for their research. So furthermore, they listen to certain experts, like Professor Lockdown, Niall Ferguson, who thought so much of it, he went and broke it with someone just to have sex with them. Then they didn't even discuss his findings in a multi-dimensional, multidisciplinary group. It is shocking. And if you look at the ministers, a lot of them simply don't believe what they're saying. You can tell. Boris Johnson has never given anyone the impression he believes anything that he's saying throughout all of this. It is very, very disconcerting. And I know you and I were wondering whether Boris Johnson would have the ego and the intelligence to be a great prime minister. He's shown himself to be a responsibility ducking, useless figurehead whose ratings are dropping rapidly.
I think everyone's ratings are dropping. Actually, it's not just Johnson's. I mean, as I said, we mentioned last week about the. I think she is it the Prime Minister of Belgium? What's the state leader in Belgium? Prime Minister? Can't remember her name. But the thing is, when she went to visit a hospital, everyone was turning their back on her.
Because of lockdown, absolutely. Because people know. You see, the thing is, the hysteria and the media, and remember what we said, conformity. People are hardwired to conform to the extent that even their neurons will change their perception of something in order to conform with other things. So there is an element of that. But then we put our leaders into power because they're meant to be, individual thinkers who think of the best for us. And all you need is relatively intelligent, perhaps medically trained